Shields up, Iron Breakers. Rurikhan here coming at you with another video, and today I'm going to be bringing you my Final Fantasy XVI review. This title was sent to me by Square Enix so that I could give it a look, do the live streams, do all of the content that I've been doing for the game and tell you guys my opinions on it. And I also purchased a physical version of the game on release date because, I have a lot of faith in Creative Business Unit 3, and I want to see if I can build up a library of physical games that I really enjoy, and I kind of expected Final Fantasy XVI to be one of those, and the game did not disappoint. I will, however, say I came into the game with expectations that were tremendously high. Like, I was actually expecting 16 to, top all of the Final Fantasies that I've ever played, which is even not that much. Like, the very first Final Fantasy game I ever played was Final Fantasy VIII, which was a very long time ago, and it was in my French cousin's console. She kind of taught me how to play the game a little bit, and I played it, and then eventually I bought the PC version when that came out, and that was kind of like my initiation into Final Fantasy. I still have very fond memories of Final Fantasy VIII. I greatly enjoyed what I played of it back then. Since then, I haven't really played a whole lot of Final Fantasies, but one that I did play that really marked me was definitely Final Fantasy XIV. And I understand that for a lot of people, the issue of 14 is somewhat divisive because they're like, well, it's not really kind of like a mainline title because it's an MMO and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, well, whatever the hell it is, Final Fantasy XIV, even after 16, is still my favorite Final Fantasy game. Now, that's not to say that 16 is not good, quite the opposite. I love what the team has done with Final Fantasy XVI. There's this whole discussion going on right now in the community of people arguing whether or not the game is an RPG, which, if you really think about it, the term of RPG has kind of been diluted over the years, to be completely honest, because there's a lot of video games that people consider RPGs nowadays. Like, for instance, Assassin's Creed Valhalla is considered an RPG as far as I'm aware, which is something that started with Assassin's Creed Origins. God of War, a lot of people consider God of War to be an RPG. It's just the term itself has kind of been watered down. Now, is Final Fantasy XVI an RPG? I would argue that it has RPG elements because you basically get to choose the skills that you utilize. Like the skills that you're seeing me use in this gameplay, this is a deliberate choice that I have made. There are 6 skills that you get to choose from, and then you also have 3 different accessories that you can equip, as well as a weapon and 2 pieces of armor. And, the weapon and pieces of armor, those are usually just hey, just equip the one that's got the biggest number, and that's pretty much it. There's not a whole lot else to it when it comes to the weapon and pieces of armor. However, the skills themselves do dictate the way in which you play the game, and the charms that you equip are supposed to also help you dictate the way that you play the game. So, for instance, you'll see that whenever I dodge, my character does this weird thing where he slides to the side. That is because of a special ring that you get when you play the game, and that was my choice. If you're playing with, say, one of the dominants, which is Titan, that ring is not going to be as valuable to you because you're probably going to want to be parrying things more because that's kind of the ability. So there are some choices there. Then there are also some items that are just considered to be some of the best. Like there's an item that gives you 5% additional damage, and once you actually get it upgraded in Final Fantasy mode, it'll probably deal even more. So, there's going to be some items that are just going to be really good. But fundamentally, the RPG elements of this game come more so from the fact that you are out there doing quests and that you are, customizing your build with the abilities that you actually want to use and abilities that synergize well with each other when it comes to playing through the game. So in that aspect, I would say it does have some RPG elements, but at the end of the day, like I said in my first impressions video, Final Fantasy XVI, I consider it to be this is a term that was coined by Total Biscuit back in the day. I consider it to be a spectacle fighter, something akin to a Bayonetta, a Devil May Cry, Metal Gear Rising. That type of game, that is what I consider Final Fantasy XVI to be. It is, however, much larger than a lot of those games in terms of length because, like I said, I spent 70 hours playing this game because there's a lot of things to do. Now, depending on the type of player that you are, your playtime is going to vary. Like, I would wager that most players are going to be hitting somewhere between 40 and 50 hours, depending on the number of side quests that you choose to do and whatnot. And if you just beeline the main story, you're probably going to go at it considerably faster. these are not things that I did because I was enjoying the game, and we'll be going into more detail in terms of like side quests and all that stuff, because I know that there's definitely a lot of division when it comes to the community in regards to those things. But one of the first things that I want to tackle is definitely the visuals. These are usually, the things that I tend to tackle first whenever I'm doing these types of video game reviews. When it comes to the visuals, I feel like they're really, really good. I think that the game looks friggin' fantastic. I think that the animations are absolutely gorgeous. The game has amazing set piece moments, a lot of them even during combat. And for a lot of people, they look at this as kind of like a negative. I'm not going to be showing those clashes in this footage, by the way. This is mostly spoiler-free footage, in case you guys are concerned. This is just me doing some really early quests in Final Fantasy mode. But if you don't want to see anything at all, feel free to just minimize the window and just listening to the soothing sounds of my voice. I'll call out your attention when there are going to be some things on screen that I want you to look at. But, don't worry about that. I'm not going to be showcasing any of those, but I understand that for a lot of players, and these were some complaints that I've heard during my live streams, which is actually really good feedback that allows me to kind of like re-enter this into the discussion when I'm doing a review, was that, oh, there's just so much on screen, I have no idea what is going on. And there were definitely moments that I felt like that, where it's like, dude, there's just so much going on screen, I can barely make it out because like, oh, there's two big icon fighting, and it's just like big friggin' particle effects and all kinds of other crazy stuff happening on screen. But after you get used to it, and when you are playing, like, I think that as someone who is simply watching the game, it is much harder to fully understand what is going on than someone who is playing the game. And when you are playing the game, after a while, you start getting into a rhythm with each of these big spectacle fights that happen. And it's not really a huge problem. At least it wasn't for me. Maybe it is for other people. But for the most part, it was not a big problem. Also, at least in the normal difficulty of the game, these fights were not terribly challenging. I expect them to be a little bit harder in Final Fantasy mode, but once I get there, I might have to report back on that. But for now, it's just like, I don't think that is a problem. Now, there is the issue of performance. Performance is not perfect, and this again goes back to one thing where I tend to clash with the community when it comes to this opinion that I have, which is, to me, look, choose. You want 60 FPS or you want 30 FPS? I don't want you wasting your time optimizing for both. It's a waste of everybody's time. Choose what you want. And there are situations where the game is running, I don't know, between 30 and 40 and whatnot when you're exploring the world. And then combat kicks in and you get some dynamic resolution coming in and everything is running at 60. I mean, it's not even full 60. Sometimes it goes a little bit below 60 because they're really pushing the visuals. It bothers me a little bit when I'm exploring and stuff that the frame rate just drops, and there is an area closer to the end of the game which is a really wide sprawling area, and in there it was really noticeable, the frame drop. So I think that they need to work on that a little bit if you're playing in performance mode. I don't know, use more dynamic resolution. I really don't care that much. It's not a big deal for me. But the important part is that when you're in combat, the game is running very smoothly. Another issue with the visuals is definitely the motion blur, which up until the moment where I finished the game, there still wasn't an option to turn off the motion blur, which it gets annoying when you are exploring and you just turn the camera and whoosh, big motion blur all over the place. But again, at the end of the day, it didn't completely ruin my experience, but it did get bothersome at times. That would be what I can say about it. And I know that for a lot of players, motion blur really bothers them, so it is what it is. In terms of cutscenes, I think that the cutscenes, very much like the set pieces, they're really good, but there is definitely a different quality to cutscenes where you're just like speaking to a character before a quest, or an actual cutscene where characters are interacting and doing things that are very relevant to the story. This is particularly noticeable whenever you are taking on side quests and there's like a dialogue scene between two characters. You can definitely tell it's like, okay, so this is like a lower quality cutscene versus when, the main story cutscenes are happening. This, I think, is to be expected. No game is ever really going to nail these things down. So, it is what it is. There are situations where the game does tend to get a little bit dark, and I kind of wish that developers would be able to do something about the darkness of the game. Because, like, say for instance, I'm somebody who loves natural lighting, so I'm in a room and, you know, I got my blinds open and there's natural lighting flooding into a room, and if something in the game gets really dark, I can barely see it. Okay, even the footage that you guys are watching right now, I've actually changed the brightness on VLC so that this would be more visible in the video that you guys are watching. Because the recorded footage that I had was so dark, I'm like, I can barely see anything right now. So I wish that they did something with that. And there's also a this is actually this was actually a little bit of a problem for me. And this is kind of like hard to talk about without revealing just something. It's not, I don't consider it to be a major spoiler, but let's just say that at a certain point in the game, I would estimate it's like at 60 or 70% of the game, an event happens. And this event that happens changes the color of the skybox. And from that moment onwards, the whole game feels like there's like a pinkish tint wherever you are out in the world. And to me, I was like, okay, I get what you're going for, and I think that it is important for you to, you know, show this thing the way that you want to show it. But I think that like spending 40% or more of the game with like a pinkish hue shift in the visuals, I feel like that was maybe a little bit too much. Maybe it's a little bit nitpicky. If you've played the game and you know exactly what I'm talking about, let me know in the comment section how you felt about it. But, you know, I am someone who is very specific when it comes to giving out these criticisms, even for games that I like. I think that it's important to be honest about everything that you discuss, which to me, you know, I love this game. I think the game is amazing, but I think that with that specific thing of like the pinkish hue, it bothered me because, like, I know the game looks better than this. I know the game could be looking way better than this. And I feel like what you've done with the story of the game kind of conflicts a little bit with how the game can look when you're at that final stretch of the game. And, you know, that thing is something that just kind of stuck with me. And I'm like, man, I wish maybe do this thing later. I don't know. Maybe give us an option to be like, hey, you know that this event has happened. You want to turn off the effect that does this, and then people could choose. Because I love the way the game looks, and that last 40% bothered me a little bit. But, you know, it is what it is at this point. It's also a bit of nitpick, but I like to be precise when it comes to these things. Then when it comes to sound, I think that the sound effects are great, from sword clashes to even the icon clashes, like the spell effects, all of that stuff. I think it sounds absolutely phenomenal. I think that the voice acting in this game is absolutely top tier. I think that the performance that the actors have done really bring these characters to life, particularly in the amazing cutscenes that I talked about previously when it comes to the visuals. So I think that sound-wise, absolutely amazing. And then when it comes to the soundtrack, I mean, it's Soken. I love what Soken does with soundtracks. I love pretty much every track that this game has. Even if they're not the style of music that I enjoy, the moment at which they use that style of music, it makes perfect sense, and it just works. And I know that this is because this team does not do soundtracks in isolation, and it really shows. Like, you see the tracks shift in intensity depending on what is happening on screen, and they're not scared of making the music come to the foreground, which is something that a lot of games are scared of. Like a recent game that I reviewed, Diablo 4, was actually a problem that I personally had with the game, was the fact that it has a really good soundtrack, but they're scared of bringing it to the forefront, and it was just like hidden, and I had to completely change the mix of the game to be able to actually hear the soundtrack proper, which was a good soundtrack. But in 16, the soundtrack is amazing, and in the key moments, there are even times where I felt like maybe you guys pushed it a little bit too much to the forefront, because there are actually certain events and cutscenes where I could barely hear what characters were saying over the soundtrack. So there were a couple of moments where they pushed it a little bit too far to one side, but overall, absolutely phenomenal. I cannot recommend when it comes to soundtrack of this game enough, but that is something that I already expected as someone who previously played Final Fantasy XIV, and the soundtrack of 14 is absolutely legendary, very much like the soundtrack of 16 is also absolutely legendary. I love every single thing about it, and very quickly the music becomes familiar as well. Like, you'll zone into an area and you hear the music of that area. Whenever that music changes, you know that it's because, oh, there's a major event happening here. There's some type of story beat thing that is happening that I need to pay attention to. And it's just absolutely phenomenal. That is what I would have to say when it comes to the soundtrack. Now, in terms of the story is kind of hard to talk about without getting into spoiler territory, obviously. Which is something that I definitely don't want to do. Let's just say that the story pretty much delivered on all fronts. And from my personal experience, I greatly enjoyed the story from beginning to end. I've heard that there are some people who had some problems near the end of the game. I'm not sure if that is related to Sidequests, which is another topic that we're going to get into. It was definitely not a problem for me. I enjoyed the story throughout, and this is with some random troll even just hopping into my streams and spoiling something that happens near the end of the game. And even knowing that spoiler, the way that they delivered those story beats, it still was able to get me a little bit emotional near the end. They really do a fantastic job. I think the story is awesome. For those of you that are wondering, what are the themes? The themes of the story of this story, I'm not going to give you guys the main plot, but the themes are basically there's a lot going on about slavery, about these people that are born with magical powers and they're basically immediately enslaved. And then there are also some people who are born with such ridiculous magical powers that they become dominants and they can summon, you know, the really big icons of Final Fantasy like Ramuh, Titan, Ifrit, Phoenix, all of this stuff. And there's a lot of inspiration in the story from Game of Thrones. You can definitely tell. A lot of themes from Game of Thrones appear to make their way into the game. But yeah, it is very much a story based around the concept of slavery, destiny, free will, all of these things. And there's been a discussion in the community, which was the whole topic about there's not really black characters in this game. And this is like a whole thing where it instantly goes into diversity. The diversity is a serious problem, is a serious issue. And I'm going to be real. I don't know how you fix this problem, particularly with the subject matter of this game, because I would wager that the backlash that this team would get for including black characters in the game would actually be so absolutely massive. Because of the subject matter, like I said, this game tackles the topic of slavery. Imagine what it would be like to just see a random NPC scream at a black character that is basically a slave. And the absolute abusive behavior that a lot of these NPCs have towards these characters that are born with magic powers. Now, was this the right decision? I don't know. I'm obviously not the right person to talk about that, so I'm not going to be going too deep into that, but there is something that I wanted to bring up. And that is, ever since that day where it was discussed that the game was not going to be featuring black characters, ever since that day, it feels like the game has been under an absolute barrage of media assault where they're just like, coming up with all kinds of different things that they can potentially throw at the game. And it makes me sad, really, because I don't think the game lacks diversity, because even though there's not black characters, there's definitely, I think that some of the characters are inspired by Middle Eastern, at least at certain points of the game, I would imagine, like particularly like the Dalmatians and stuff like that. I think that whole section of the game is heavily inspired on Middle Eastern themes. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but that's definitely the way that I felt. So it's not like the game is just full on, just white people, whatever. But again, this is just a discussion that is so weird to me. And it really bothers me that the game was attacked on this level. Like, look at this. This is just like four pieces that you can actually watch the screen now. This is just four pieces that Jesse Cox brought up, where you have Final Fantasy 16 shouldn't be this divisive. And this is pretty much, I've read these articles. This is pretty much a nothing burger. Like, this article finishes with the author of the article saying, oh, I still think that Final Fantasy 16 is amazing. And it's like, what are we even talking about? It's such a weird thing because this article says absolutely nothing. Like, I read the whole thing and it's like, okay, so nothing. All right, cool. And it also brings up the whole thing about, oh, it's not really an RPG, but it's kind of an RPG, but it's not, but it's, that whole discussion. Then we have this one, Final Fantasy 16's gay romance fails to commit where it counts. Now, I'm not sure if not Kotaku, but specifically the person who wrote this article, because the interesting thing about this is, like, we're all, when it comes to these criticisms that the game has received, we've all been very critical of, like, Kotaku, but the actual review of the game, which I've read Kotaku's review of the game, is really good. It's a really good review overall. It pretty much reflects a lot of the things that I'm probably going to even say in this review, and it makes sense. These other articles just like clickbait stuff to get people to click. But anyway, Final Fantasy 16's gay romance fails to commit where it counts. I read this and it made me wonder if the person who wrote this article wanted Final Fantasy 16 to be like a dating simulator for characters. I'm not sure if that's what they expected. I feel like this relationship is perfectly well presented, and actually Dion is one of my favorite characters in the game, which is this blonde character here. He's one of the main characters. And, there's a gay romance scene. It's like, it is what it is. The focus of this game is not on romantic relationships. There is a romantic relationship between two of the characters, and there's this gay romantic relationship, and that's it that I can remember. These are the two relationships that are portrayed in the game, and neither of them receives that much focus. It's not like they spend 90% of the game focusing on the other relationship or anything like that. So I don't understand why it fails to commit. It showed some really cool scenes with these two characters. I don't know. As a matter of fact, these two characters, I believe, is probably the reason why this game did not come out on the Middle East. And these scenes were actually, from what I've seen in the game, these would have been very easy scenes to kind of like edit out. And, the creative business unit 3 was like, no. We want these scenes in the game. We're not removing them. You guys don't want the game in the Middle East? Hey, that's too friggin' bad. That's your problem. So I don't know what else you want at this point, Then we have, not even Final Fantasy 16 devs could follow the game's confusing story. Let me tell you, anybody can follow this game's story, and you don't even need to read the ATL. ATL just adds additional context if you want to know more about the characters. The story is not confusing at all. It is super easy to understand. Most people will get it just by playing the main story. You don't even need to do side quests if you don't want to. And you don't need to look at the ATL at all unless you weren't paying attention during a cutscene. You're like, oh, what happened here? Maybe let me just go check it out, whatever. So this is, again, an article that's a complete nothing burger. And then we have Final Fantasy XVI's Jill should be more than pretty. Square Enix heroine embodies an age-old issue developers have with women in video games. Now, when I read this article, it made me question if the person writing the article actually played the game, because they're saying that this character has no agency in the game. And I was like, I'm not going to get into details because I don't want to spoil stories. I want to make sure that this review stays spoiler-free. But trust me, this character has a lot of agency when it comes to this game. Not to mention, this character's story is friggin' awesome. Her backstory, the stuff that happens to her, the things she has to deal with, like the climax of the story for her, it is insane. I do feel like there's one thing that could have been done better to this character, and there's probably a lot of people that are going to agree with me, but I don't want to talk about that thing. Let's just say it's closer to the end of the game, and probably you guys will know what I'm talking about. That would be the only thing that I would have to criticize. But other than that, this is a phenomenal character. And it's not even my favorite character. I like the healer more. But, you know, it is what it is. But getting back to things like, you know, I just wanted to bring this up. Like, there's all this criticism behind the game, and there's probably going to be a lot of people that are going to be influenced by it. And when it comes to those Kotaku articles over there, I would not let that really, you know, affect your opinion in any way. I'm sure you can find, you know, content creator reviews out there. I know that Skill Up also didn't like the game, and I think that's perfectly valid. He doesn't like some of the aspects of the game, but I do want to talk about side quests because that was one of the things that Skill Up criticized, and a lot of people have been criticizing when it comes to Final Fantasy XVI. And as someone who did every single side quest as well as every single trial, I basically did every bit of content that was in the game before jumping into Final Fantasy mode. As a matter of fact, I did every single bit of content that was in the game before I jumped into the final mission. And I pretty much enjoyed all of it. I didn't really have a problem with the side quests like a lot of people do. Now, there's a lot of discussion about, ooh, these are the worst side quests. These are just fetch side quests. And it's like, I am confused as to what game people played. Because, number one, these are not the worst side quests I've ever done. Then again, maybe I just play more games than most people. I don't know. But I've done games where side quests are absolute slogs. That was not the case here. As a matter of fact, a lot of the side quests were really good. And they added a lot of background information for characters, for what is happening in the world. And again, ever since I finished the game, I've been seeing videos of people's opinions on it, and there are people who are like, oh, everybody just craps on the main character because he's branded, and he's like, you know, because the main character is kind of like treated like one of those slaves and whatnot, and so everybody craps on him and whatnot. And I've seen a lot of videos of people that have this opinion that they overplay it, and I'm like, I feel that that is necessary to set up what happens later in the story and to kind of put you in the mindset of kind of like what we're fighting for. I think it makes perfect sense. But, you know, people are going to have their differing opinions when it comes to that. And I think that a majority of the side quests do a good job of illustrating what they want you to know about the world. The bonus thing, not the bonus things, but like the additional information that they want to give you in terms of what is happening in the world, in terms of the overall feel that you can have in the world. And again, these are all things that you can skip because they are side quests. They're not mandatory, but you know, they do give you rewards in the form of crafting materials and sometimes in the form of like charms and things like this. And charms are actually important. Like, that was another topic of discussion that people would say is that, oh, the rewards for the quests are terrible. And I'm like, well, some of the side quests would actually give me like a charm that would completely cause me to change my playstyle and change a bunch of different abilities to go for something different, which kind of reinforces the whole RPG aspect that we were talking about previously. So it's weird to me. It just feels like people expected these side quests to be on the level of something like The Witcher, which Witcher obviously has some of the best side quests in the business, and these quests don't really reach that, but they're still good quests for the most part. There are, however, some of the quests that are just fetch quests, but even in fetch quests, you tend to get a lot of knowledge of what is happening around the world. So, like, for instance, one of the first side quests that you get in the game, as a matter of fact, I think it's the first side quest that you get in the game, is you're supposed to pick up 3 bowls of food and take them to 3 people. And even that tells you a little bit of story because you get to learn who are these 3 people. They are hardworking people, or they are just people who are, they're just people who are kind of like essential to your operation for this reason or that reason. And it gives you background, and it's optional. You know, you can do them, you cannot do them. But even some of those I found important. Now, there were also some side quests just like, whatever, go over here, kill this thing, whatever. Yes, it also has those, and those are not super interesting. But there's more in terms of interesting side quests than side quests that are not interesting. But it all depends on what you expect, because it is a very contrasting experience from the main missions. Like, when you're going on a main mission, like one of the ones that you're seeing is like, oh, we're going through, we're killing things, we're doing all of these things, and there's big cinematic set pieces. And usually with side quests, those don't happen. That's not to say that they don't happen at some points, because they do. As a matter of fact, there are some side quests near the end of the game that you should absolutely not skip because they really build on relationships that you have seen. They really build on important characters. And in case you miss some of those quests, you can always watch my live streams because it's all there. But they do build on, character relationships and give more detail as to what certain characters do and their goals, and kind of like wrap up the storyline around those characters. And these, even though they're side characters, I found them to be interesting. But again, it all depends on how much you are enjoying. So there's definitely going to be people that are not going to enjoy that. Now, another aspect of the side quest that I would like to bring up is with Final Fantasy XVI, something that I personally enjoyed is that the side quests are achievable within a reasonable time frame. Because I feel like nowadays, whenever you have a video game that has a bunch of side quests, you tend to get to a point where it's like, okay, there's just too many of them. There's too many of them. I'm overwhelmed. There's like 50 quests over in this town. There's like 300 quests over in this one. And you just get overwhelmed and, the side quests stop making sense. And I didn't feel like that was the case for 16, because if that was the case, I would have quit on the side quests and I wouldn't have done them. At no point did I feel like, I'm completely overwhelmed. There's just too many of them. I don't want to do all of this. There's usually a reasonable amount of side quests. Now, that's not to say that they are perfect, and there is a very specific thing that I want to bring up that I brought up also during my live stream, and that is that there's a moment close to the ending bits of the game where I felt like the trigger to unlock the side quest was problematic. And why is this? So the story, something is happening in the story, and they tell you, this thing is happening, our friends are under attack, we need to go help them right now. You get a sense of urgency. You're like, okay, I need to go help my friends. And then you jump into, into the actual game, and when you notice it, you're like, they've unlocked a bunch of side quests. So immediately after that cutscene where they're like, our friends are under attack, we gotta help them right now, they unlock a bunch of side quests. And I was like, okay, this kind of sucks. Because then there's also the fact that this game does have missable side quests. So there are side quests that if you progress the story, you might not be able to do them. At least I think that's the case, because I've been speaking with people like, you can miss side quests here and there. I was like, okay. And as someone who wanted to do the completionist thing of doing all of them, I was like, well, I have to go do these side quests now, because otherwise I'm going to miss out on them. And that broke my immersion for that specific bit, because in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking like, but my friends, they're under attack. And in the meantime, my character's just like chilling, doing side quests, doing some menial tasks. And I was like, okay. So that very specific moment, I felt that they were bad. And there's also one thing that I would point out, and that is that the side quests are very much backloaded. So before the final mission, for instance, they unlock a couple of side quests for you to do. I think it's like close to 10 or 11 side quests that they unlock. And it took me around, because side quests come with cutscenes and actions that you're supposed to take. But I think it took me like 5 hours of doing side quests. Then there's also hunts and other activities that you can go and do, as well as trials. There's a lot of stuff to do in the game, right? But it took me like anywhere between 5 and 6 hours before the very last mission of the game of doing side quests. Although at that point, there was a natural breaking point in the story, so it didn't bother me as much that we're doing side quests as it did before. Because before, there was just like a sense of urgency, and they're like, but first do these side quests. And I was like, didn't like that. But in the end, it was like, okay, we're backing off. We're getting ready for the last final assault, for the last thing that we got to go do. And I was like, okay, it's fine doing side quests now. This is fine. So I didn't really have a problem with it, but they're definitely backloaded. I feel like they could have been spread out more throughout the game, like pepper them in at different points and whatnot. But some of them are also tied to the evolution of the story. So, it's going to be tricky to achieve the perfect point. So side quests aren't perfect, but in my opinion, they're not nearly as bad as people are making them out to be. But that's just my personal opinion. Feel free to agree, feel free to disagree. Let me know in the comment section how you feel if you've been doing most of the side quests. But that is my takeaway from it. And then finally, we have gameplay. And in my opinion, gameplay is fantastic. I did not expect it to lean as heavily into Devil May Cry as it did. but it did a really good job of it because here's an interesting thing. Despite the fact that I enjoy this style, which is usually really well done by development companies like Platinum Games and Capcom with the Devil May Cry series, despite the fact that I really enjoy those types of games and the spectacle and, you know, the scale that these things can achieve, I'm usually not very good at them. I'm not. Like, I struggle. Like, for instance, Devil May Cry 5, I struggled to play with Nero because of the mechanic of the devil. What's it called? The thing where you had to rev up your sword? Like, I struggled. I struggled a lot to really weave in combos and do all of these things. But in Final Fantasy XVI, it felt great most of the time. There was one aspect of the game that I didn't take advantage of, and that is that you have combos that you can have a Torgal finish, which is the dog. And the reason I didn't bother with those is because, look, I'm gonna be real. The D-pad on this thing is terrible. Like, I'm sorry. Like, we need to improve controllers. Like, I don't know what console manufacturers need to do. Y'all need to fix your goddamn controls, okay? The analog sticks, and I'm not just talking about this one, all right? I could criticize this one just as easily. I could criticize an Xbox controller if I had one here. Like, the analog sticks are terrible, and the D-pad specifically on the DualSense is really bad because, like, I'll press up, and the bitch will register right. What are we doing? So, like, for instance, after you do your regular burst combo, which involves, with the default control setting, square, triangle, square, triangle, square, triangle, square, triangle, and this finishes with an explosion that sends the enemies flying, right? After you finish that combo, you can press up D-pad, and the dog, you know, Torgal goes in, and he does, like, this spinning, flaming attack, which continues the combo, and then you can follow up with more attacks, and it links up the combos, right? And I stopped doing that because half of the times that I would press up on D-pad, it would just hit the heal thing. And I was like, you know what? Screw it, I quit. It's like, whatever. I don't care. Because the dog also has an ability to heal, so it's whatever. And so I just stopped using the dog altogether. That was the only thing that I did not take advantage of, but everything else in the combos, from perfect dodges to weaving abilities into the combo, is like, I felt like an absolute beast, and I'm not even that good at the game. And then taking advantage of, like, the stagger gauge, because you can actually plan for it, and you can stagger enemies, and after you stagger the enemies, you can really let loose with a bunch of combo abilities to get things going. It just feels amazing, and it's a really huge power fantasy, especially when you are doing those major key moment fights where you're fighting, like, some of the major bosses, and you go into icon battles. Like, god damn, the power fantasy is absolutely unreal. And I don't think anybody can argue against that, even though I know that probably a lot of people will, because I don't know why, but a lot of people have decided that they hate Final Fantasy 16. And I don't know if that's because they hate games like Devil May Cry. I don't know if that's because they hate the whole diversity argument that we kind of touched up on a little bit. I don't know what it is. It's like, I don't think the game is absolutely perfect. I pointed out some flaws with the side quests. I pointed out some flaws that I found with the visuals. But in terms of the story, I loved it. In terms of the combat, I absolutely loved it, which is why I'm going through the game in Final Fantasy mode and having an absolute blast with that. Even though I expected Final Fantasy mode to make things a little bit different. It's mostly a numbers game, but I do enjoy seeing the numbers go up in this game, like trying to get the highest possible stagger damage thing is something that I've been working towards, even though I refuse to use the real meta options. I'm trying to do it on my own terms. Like this thing that you're seeing right here, this is me going for a really big stagger damage combo. I've been having an absolute blast with this. It's just so much fun to absolutely unload on a mob and just go absolutely crazy. The stagger damage in here wasn't even that much, but I've broken 200,000 in my streams. I think I went up to 212,000 damage at one point. But then there's also enemies that have like different resistances and whatnot. But I want to make that number go higher. I want to see if I can break the damage limits without necessarily using some of the more meta options, because I don't like the meta option. I'm not really going to get into details, but I think that the really meta thing, like the most powerful ability that you have in the game, I don't find it fun to use personally. But that's the beauty of it. There's so much diversity of playstyles that you can have by channeling different icons and really mix and matching your builds, that I think it's friggin' amazing. Like, personally, I would definitely recommend you guys to check out the game. Check out the demo if you're not convinced, because there is a demo, and I think that the demo is probably one of the best ways of learning. I believe that the demo also has like a second part to it that I didn't really play, which is like a combat showcase that'll allow you to play around with different icons and all of that stuff. I chose not to play that section of the demo because I wanted to experience everything fresh for the first time in the game, and I think that that was the right choice to do. But yeah, I definitely recommend this game. I think the game is absolutely phenomenal. I love the story. The one thing that this game didn't deliver on, but I guess that's because my expectations were too high, was it didn't beat Final Fantasy XIV as my favorite Final Fantasy of all times. But it definitely beat every other Final Fantasy that I ever played, which is not that many, I'll admit. But still, it is, it is right below Final Fantasy XIV for me. It is a really good game. Whether or not it will be Game of the Year, I don't know, because there's still a lot of really good games coming out this year. So that'll be really cool to see. But, for right now, it is definitely a contender. I love this game. I think the game is absolutely amazing. I highly recommend it. It's got a couple of flaws. I hope that the team can improve on the performance and get rid of that motion blur, because some of us don't actually like motion blur. But, other than that, I feel like the side quests could have been maybe a little bit more balanced, but it is what it is. If you guys enjoyed this video, let me know in the comment section down below. Let me know if you agree, if you disagree with some of the points that I've made in the comment section. And yeah, thank you all very much for watching. Hit the like button, subscribe, bell notification icon. I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay strong, stay safe. Peace out.